All right, everyone, thanks for joining us. So first, before I talk about iRise and the new responsive prototyping features, I want to give you a look at a new feature in iRise that's currently in beta testing and is about to be released. It's a Chrome plugin called Web Importer, and what it does is it lets you import existing web pages as either native iRise prototypes or as single image screenshots. And depending on what you're prototyping in iRise, I think it can save you a ton of time. So to demo this, I'm going to use the Wells Fargo site. So while I'm on the page I want to import, I'll click the plugin icon up at the top, and it's going to ask me if I want to import the page as iRise widgets or as one big screenshot. And I'll choose widgets. Then I'll need to pick the project that I want to import the pages into. And once I have, I'll hit the import button. It'll take a few seconds here. And I'm going to import a few more pages. Let's import this checking page. And let's do one more. I want to import this pop-up. And because it's a pop-up, it technically has the same page name as the previous page, so I'm going to add pop-up to the name. And now if I go to my project and refresh, you'll see that those pages were imported. Now again, these are real working iRise widgets. So we've got our search input, these different form elements here, the drop down, we've got the buttons and images. This text is all editable now, and we can start adding interactions. Well, maybe I'll just link a few pages together. Let's link this to the second screen. On this page here, let's link that pop-up. And then let's go ahead and preview. And pretty amazing. I mean, it's going to be hard to tell the difference between the actual page and the imported iRise prototype. Here we've got the page itself, and this is the prototype. And again, the links are all working. So this can obviously be a huge time saver. A lot of times projects that you're starting have an existing project that they're based off of, so this is great for that. Another great use is creating custom libraries. What I can actually do is start clicking on these iRise widgets. I can right click and save the selection as a widget, and that saves it to my library. Let's do that for a few more here. Maybe we'll save off this login widget. Let's see if we can save off the entire footer. Maybe we'll save off some images. We've got a button here we'll save. And then if we go to our library, we'll see that we've got those widgets ready for use. So these can be accessed by the entire team. And we can start creating our pages. Pretty darn amazing. Now these Wells pages, they imported almost perfectly. It's not always going to be perfect. Sometimes there's going to be fonts used that because of licensing, maybe they can't be imported, or there's images that can't be grabbed, or other small issues. But even when the import isn't perfect, it's still going to save you a huge amount of time. So if you're interested in being involved in the beta testing, go ahead and add a comment in the webinar comment panel, and we will add you to the list. So now back to the webinar theme of responsive design. So first I'm going to give you a very quick overview of what iRise is, and then I'm going to cover the tools in iRise that let you create responsive prototypes. So iRise is a platform designed to help teams more effectively gather and validate requirements, and also to refine their designs and interactions. And this is done by including real-time collaborative prototyping as part of the software development lifecycle. The fact is that it all starts and ends with the quality of your requirements and designs. As Forrester put it, companies have become better at building and delivering faster, but they still haven't cracked the code on figuring out what it is they need to build. And that is because the common requirements challenges still exist. You've got the sheer volume of information that you need to gather for today's complex applications, which is challenging to say the least. You've got the inevitable ambiguity that comes from interpreting text. You've got errors of omission, not knowing what you don't know. And more recently, you have the challenge of also getting the UX right. There's a concept you may have heard that every functional requirement is about design in some way. And the traditional text-based tools aren't really well suited for solving the design challenges that companies face today. And those include conveying the experience in UX, capturing feedback, iterating fast and failing fast, and also collaborating with a team. And using the old familiar tools like Excel and Word, or Agile Post-it notes, or now we've got nice online tools like Jira and TFS and HPALM, teams still struggle to create stories and requirements documents that stakeholders and the business can actually understand and use for validation. These newer tools may bring your requirements online and give easier access to them, but they still don't address the fundamental problem, which is that they're still text, which alone isn't enough to convey today's complex applications. Which brings us to how iRise solves this problem. And again, it's by combining prototyping with requirements or Agile story user management. And iRise supports all levels of fidelity, whether it's sketches or wireframes or prototypes. You can go as high fidelity as you want, and you can move between low and high fidelity quickly. Then I mentioned some of the other online tools which iRise actually integrates with. So you can integrate iRise and prototyping with tools like Jira or Jama or Rally or TFS or any of the tools you might already be using. You can sync in real time so that all the teams are saying the same accurate information, puts everybody on the same page, and brings the power of prototyping to those tools. And some of the value props that you'd gain by using iRise: you're going to have better collaboration. Requirements are going to be easier to gather, understand, and validate. You're going to create better designs. You're going to make the process easier and more enjoyable for your company and for your stakeholders as well. It's going to make QA, it's going to make their job easier. It's going to make it easier to test. And it's also going to bring clarity to the development team on what to build. It's also perfect for the Agile process if that's what you're using. And it's going to ultimately slash requirements time and cut rework and overall project cost. So now let's jump over to the product and take a quick look at that. So if we look at the platform, first you have the online editor, and this is where you'll build and test your wireframes and prototypes. And to do that, you can drag in existing screens like you might create in Photoshop or Sketch if you want to start that way, and you can build upon them. Or you can build them out of real working widgets that are native to iRise. And you can drag those onto your page and then set up your interactions. You, of course, have the ability to share your prototypes with anyone by sending them a link. And then in player mode, your stakeholders will have the ability to interact with your prototypes, to give you feedback, and to start conversations. You can also add and edit requirements in the browser, which is right beside the functionality that they describe. And this is really a key value prop because it makes them easier to write and to understand based on being right next to the functionality that they're describing. And you can even have conversations that are tied to specific requirements in the prototype. And then there's iRise Manager, which is where you'll sort, prioritize, and manage your issues and requirements that you're gathering. So that's a very quick overview of the iRise platform. So now let's talk about the tools in iRise that let you create responsive designs. First, I want to discuss the two different page types. And this is important because the responsive settings that we're going to cover, they won't behave as you're expecting if we don't set the correct page type. And there are two different types of layouts. You have fixed and fluid. And the differences are pretty obvious. A fixed layout, it uses a specific page size that you set in iRise. This example page here is 1280. And that is not going to change based on the browser window. So this page is set to center, which is probably the most common setting. And if we preview, we'll see that it stays at 1280 pixels wide, and it's going to stay centered for us. So now let's talk about the two fluid page types that you'll use for responsive prototyping. You have fit width and you have fit to window. Fit width is the most common, and I'll switch this page type so you can see what that does. And because I have some responsive widgets on this page, you'll see that those widgets now react and resize along with the width of the browser window, but not the height. Now the other fluid page type is called fit to window, and with this setting, both the width and the height of the page are going to automatically adjust with the browser. And this is mainly used when you have a mobile app screen that uses independent scrolling panels. And here's an example of that. But again, the most common setting is going to be fit width, and all the examples we'll look at today will use that setting. So what I want to do now is build a very simple page that uses these concepts. And I think that's a good way to show you how these various features can work together to build a responsive layout. And then after that, I'm going to show you some example pages and explain how they were built. So the first thing I want to do is create a new page. And I want to make sure that that is set to fit width, which it is. Then we'll jump over to our library. And I'm going to drop this logo in the center and give it a layout of top center. And then maybe we want to drop some breadcrumbs for menus up on the top left corner. I'll drop this one on the top right. And for this one on the top right, I'm going to give it a layout of top right. And then if we preview, we'll notice that they all react to the browser size and behave accordingly. So next thing I want to do is show you a trick for adding responsive images. So what you want to do is drop a container onto the page. And I'm going to simulate a top banner. And then, or under the fill options, you'll see an option for uploading an image background. And that's what I'm going to do here. So for image scaling, we'll set that to cover. Set it to not repeat, and then these horizontal and vertical align options, you can adjust those depending on the image you have. For this one, I'm going to try middle. Looks pretty good. And then the last thing we want to do is we want this banner to stretch with the page. So we'll go ahead and set this to stretch top. And let's set a left and right margin of 10 pixels. Let's go ahead and preview. And you'll see now that that banner is going to dynamically adjust, and the image inside is going to do the same. So this is a nice trick. Anytime you want to use responsive images, drop a container on the page, use a background image, and then you can adjust it to respond as you'd like. So next thing I'm going to do is let's drop some columns onto the page. Now I've saved these off to the library. Now each of these, if you look here, are set to be 312 pixels wide. So if we go ahead and preview this, you'll see that regardless of browser size, they're going to stay that size. So what we can do is very simply, if we select all of these, and let's center them, and then what we want to do is set them to percentage for both the width and for position. So the position is going to adjust dynamically based on the percentage size of the page, and the width is going to do the same. And now let's preview that. And we'll see that they are indeed adjusting. Now this text inside, we'd probably want that to do the same. So what we can do is select those. And we can set the width on these to percentage. Preview it one more time. And we'll see that that text is now adjusting dynamically. So again, this is a very simple page, but you can see how you can quickly and intuitively build a responsive design using those basic settings that we just showed. And there is one other layout setting, this last icon here, that I want to cover and show you what that does. This is for stretching both the height and the width. And this is useful for full screen overlays. If you look at the modal dialog in the iRise widget library, it is set to full stretch, so when I drop it onto the page, it's going to automatically expand to fit the screen. And if we preview, it's going to resize with it. And if you go to support.irise.com and search for responsive design, there's a couple useful articles, and one of them has a helpful diagram that shows all these settings. Which actually leads to an important concept that you need to understand. If a widget with responsive settings sits within a container, it's going to use the container's edge as a reference for its layout, size and position settings. It's not going to use a browser window. So these text widgets are set to about 84%. And because they're in this container, it's going to be 84% of the container itself, not the page size. Here's another good example of that concept. This blue arrow image here, this is set to top right layout, and it sits 10 pixels from the top and right edge. And because it's in this container, it's using its edge as a reference. And it's positioning itself accordingly if we preview. I think you can see how, using this example, why it's important that the widgets use containers as a reference point for their settings and not just a page. It really gives you a lot of flexibility for creating your page layouts. So now let's talk quickly about breakpoints. So you're probably familiar with the concept. They're often thought about in terms of device type. So you might want one breakpoint for your mobile device screen at, say, 320 pixels wide, and maybe set a tablet breakpoint set to 770 pixels, and so on. The way you set these breakpoints in iRise is using the breakpoint iBlock. And you can download this at iRise.com. What you want to do is then just drag it onto any of the pages you want to use it on. And then once you select the breakpoint iBlock, you'll see the various defaults that come with it. And you can tweak these as you like and adjust them. And then once you have this iBlock on your page and select it and hit the Actions tab, you'll see that you have a new set of breakpoint event actions to choose from up at the top. And they correspond obviously to the breakpoints that you set. So breakpoints can be used in two ways when they're crossed. To either adjust content on the page, like doing things like showing and hiding or modifying a widget, or you can use them to navigate to another page when they're crossed. And that's what this example project here does. So what I've done is I've created 3 pages, each with fluid content that's optimized for specific breakpoints. So if we preview this, we'll see that the largest size has 2 columns and is fluid. And then once it crosses that second breakpoint of 770 pixels, it's going to navigate to a new page that has content that's optimized for that size. And on that page, if we cross the breakpoint of 320 pixels, it's going to navigate to the mobile page that I've set up. And it's even going to use the built-in mobile emulator. And of course, the reverse is also true. So I've set up breakpoints to when you cross them back, it goes to the appropriate page. So how did I do it? Well, if we select the iBlock on the first page and go to the Actions tab, you'll see that I've created an action that says, essentially, when device 3 breakpoint is crossed, I want to link to a new screen. And it's simple as that. And then on the second page, if the 4th breakpoint is crossed, it's going to jump back to the larger page. And then if the second breakpoint is crossed, it's going to navigate to that iPhone page. And here we're navigating again when the breakpoint is crossed, but you can use it on any of the standard iRise actions. For example, on this page, for this content section, I've created 2 views, one with 4 columns and one with 3. And if we click on the iBlock, you'll see that I'm switching between those views based on crossing certain breakpoints. So let's preview here, and you'll see that when the page is larger, I'm showing the 4-column view. And then when it switches to the 3-column view, when that 4th breakpoint is crossed, which gives the viewer an optimized layout. So let's look at a few more examples now that I've covered all the basics, and I think you'll quickly start to understand how you can construct your pages. On this page, I've got 2 rows, each with 2 different views. All of the content is set to size by percentage, so it's going to be fluid. That's both the containers and cards and the text widgets inside them. And I've got these icons. They're set to center themselves inside the container. And as you can probably guess, when those breakpoints are crossed, it's going to switch between the 2 views to optimize the layout. On this example here, I've created a center container to hold these text widgets. And I set the column to stretch with the page, which is what you'll see it does. And then the text widgets are all set to percentage, so they're going to resize with that column. Now, the other cool thing I'm doing on this page is I'm using breakpoints to do two things. First, I'm hiding this image on the right in order to give us more space. And then I'm also adjusting this right margin using CSS. So if we look at the Advanced tab on the Format Widgets action, you'll see that I'm adjusting the right margin to 10 pixels for the smaller breakpoint, and then back to 290 pixels for the larger breakpoint. And regarding just general advice regarding when to show and hide widgets using actions and breakpoints versus navigating to another page, I think it depends on how complex the pages are. So for larger changes, I tend to find that creating a new page is often easier and then navigating to it using the breakpoints. But if most of the changes that you're doing are confined to maybe a few views or items that you want to show and hide, then using the breakpoint driven actions within the same page can work just fine. So let's look at one more example. So this page is similar to the other we just looked at. I've got a responsive column in the center with two views, one with an image and one without. And I'm switching it and also hiding the images on the left using a breakpoint. And I'm also adjusting the left margin of this text column using that CSS trick that I showed you. And I'm even animating it so that you can see better what's happening. So lastly, I want to cover a few tips and tricks. So the first is images and containers. So when you want an image to resize with the page, the best way to do this is to use a container. So drop that where you want the image and then set a background image for it. And then you want to set image scaling to cover and set it not to repeat. That's what I'm doing here for this banner and in other places in the prototype. Then of course you need to set the container settings to percentage or whatever layout you're looking for, but use a background image and then it's going to resize dynamically for you and adjust the proportions accordingly. All right, for the second tip, start with pixels and then move to percentages. You actually saw this a bit earlier in my demo. It's usually the easiest way to do things, especially if you're just starting out creating responsive prototypes. And that's to set up the page as you'd like it using pixels. And then once you've got it ready, then you can start switching over to percentages and changing some of the layout options. But starting with just pixels and kind of getting it relatively spaced out and positioned as you'd like it is probably the easiest way to go early on. So the next tip, using containers as parents. You actually saw this quite a few times in the examples I showed. So adding a container to a page and setting it to resize either by percentage or to stretch, and then adding content inside it is a great way to control your layout and isolate certain areas that you want to behave a certain way, but not worrying about page-wide settings. Next tip, using breakpoints with the device emulators. Again, this is a simple tip that you saw me use. Navigating to a page, a mobile page that uses the emulators is a great way to demo your mobile content along with your web content and showing the viewer how it would switch between one and another. Next tip, create responsive widget libraries. So in iRise, you can right-click on any widget and save it to your library. And that way you and your entire team can reuse them. Well, those saved widgets that you save to the library, they retain their responsive settings. So for this middle column widget, for example, that I created, I can right-click on this and save it to my library. And then anytime I need to use something similar, I can just drag it onto my page and it's going to respond responsively for me right off the bat. As you can imagine, this is a huge time saver if you use it. You're literally building on your success as you use iRise, so your team will just become more efficient the more you build. And the last tip is to use CSS for your more complex changes. Again, you saw me do this. It's very useful when you want to do things like adjust margins to your widgets should the need arise. But just keep in mind that you can modify your CSS in iRise based on the breakpoints. So if the opportunity arises, it can be very useful. So that's it for my demo. I'm going to now throw it back to Brian, who's going to open it up to questions.